Silvio Schueler from BFW. Please, the floor is yours. Tell us more what's going on here in Austria.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this very important and interesting meeting today and tomorrow. And I'm very happy that I can contribute with some of our work that we have done on these topics within the last years. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So my topic is on assisted migration and assisted gene flow of tree species and seed provenances to as a means to improve forest resilience in climate change, and is a work that let's say it's a summary of work that I've also done with my colleague Darw Chakraborty within the last years. Let's see, I pushed the right button. Yes. We heard already a lot about climate change, about what might come, and I just want to draw our attention to two points. On the one side, we already have seen some changes in the past, and starting now being now in the year 2020, and looking, let's say in each month how the temperature is going to developing on a global scale. We have still a wide range of possible developments where we could go. So for our forests, that in which way we go, that could make a huge difference. Already today, we have seen that the climate crisis already reached the European forests. These are pictures that many of you have seen in their own countries. This is a picture in northern Austria, not in the Alpine area, but anyhow, you see them at other places as well. And this is mainly on Norway spruce. But we have seen similar pictures in other regions for other tree species, as for Austrian pine, where we have seen the dieback a couple of years ago. For beech, we have seen that very old, huge trees are dying due to the drought and to multiple stressors. Or to ash, where it's not necessarily the climate, but the globalization who brought us a new pest and created huge loss for these important ecosystems. I would draw the attention to what have been in the past and how our forests have already changed within the last million of years. So what is the heritage with which we can live and work in the future? This is a figure from a study compiling the evidence of climate change throughout the last around 50 million years. And if you start on the left side, you see that throughout the last 50 million years, the climate temperature, global temperature, decreased slowly. Then we came to the ice ages with these regular shifts in temperatures. And here we are in these more on the right side, we see our pre-industrial temperatures, which is the zero line in this graph. And now you see where we are already moving in. We are moving in a temperature which might be between 1 or 2 degrees warmer if we are able to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, or if we are not able to reduce them, we might move into a completely different, much higher temperature. So actually what we do with climate change is we reverse a million-year-old trend of global cooling temperatures and let's say move the climate back to, in the best case, what have been 3 to 5 million years ago before the ice ages took place. Or in the worst case, we might experience in the future a climate which occurred let's say between 20 to 40 million years ago. So if we are now thinking how our forests could look like and which forest could withstand the future climate, we might also have a look at what kind of forests we have had in the past. And one thing to look at is, for example, to look at the fossil tree genera that lived in Europe or in other northern hemispheric the northern hemisphere of other continents. And of course, we have only not a complete knowledge on all the tree species, but we have an idea about the tree genera. And we see, for example, that in the past, so around 30 to 40 million years ago, we had about 130 different tree genera in Europe. We had a little bit less in Northeast Central Asia. We had much less in Western and also less in Eastern North America. So what happened during this cooling phase and during these ice ages was that many of the tree species and tree genera that we had in Europe did not survive. So today we have only 29% of the tree genera left in Europe. In contrast to other continents, we all know that Northeast Central Asia contains among the highest number of tree species. We all know from Eastern North America they have a huge and high number of tree species, a little bit less of the West, but in Europe has the strongest burden of the past climate changes. What kind of tree species did we lose? We know that from some studies who compared our past tree flora with comparable tree floras in other continents, we see that we mainly lost species with higher temperature and precipitation requirements, mainly because in the south of Europe, we did not have any tropical forest ecosystems where such tree species could survive. So overall, if we look at the past, we see that we have experienced a drastic decline of tree species diversity in pre-human times due to a mismatch of the species niche and the changing environments, and due to the lags in migration and adaptation throughout millennium time scales. This whole process took place through millions of years. So that keeps you up to the question, where can we go from here? We know that our climate change reverses this million-year-old trend within 100 or 200 years. And this keeps us needs to start, should motivate us to think about solutions, how we can save our forests and how we can support them in adapting themselves. And this is a study from last year where a lot of about the best scientists in forest science came together and wrote a review and came up with the impact of disturbances on changing forests, and the overall picture of all these studies that we have seen in the past, and already what we have seen was that future forests will certainly look different from today. Some forest managers, some forest owners already learned that painfully within the last years, and I fear that many of us will also need to learn that in the near future. Therefore, we suggest that a main issue in the future will not be to say we need to protect and support these specific, conserve these specific forests, but we need to look at the forest ecosystem services which we needed in our forests and which are important in the terms of biodiversity, in terms of recreation, in terms of all the services that forests provide to us, should be the main goal of adaptation processes. And if we assumed up a little bit how the different adaptation measures could be, let's say, could be grouped according in their support for ecosystem services, we could see that we can, let's say, we suggest that we consider our measures, our adaptation measures, as kind of defense lines to support these ecosystem services. And the first defense line, which is the weakest, is that we use assisted migration, that we use climate resilient genotypes, but also do another, let's say, management like stronger thinning measures, which should help us to retain the forest ecosystems as much as good as it is today, and also keep the same forest ecosystem services. A second defense line would of course be that we plant other native species and species mixture. So this would be also the assisted, would also include assisted migration. And we also will find places in our forests where these two defense lines are not big enough. And there we also need to think about the non-native tree species if we want to defend these forest ecosystem services. So just one or two more words about this assisted migration and assisted gene flow as concepts. For those who never heard of these concepts, is we can understand the range of a species. We can relate it to the climatic gradient where a tree species occurs. So some populations occur already today in the warmer area, some in the colder area. And with climate change, we already see that a shift of these distribution occurs. So there is, on the one side, there is an area which is still to be colonized. And if we move a tree species outside of their present range, we colonize in your area and we help the species with assisted species migration. On the other side, we might also have areas where a tree species occurs today and will occur in the future. And today, often we hear that, of course, oh, these species might be suitable also in the future. Then it does not consider that the same populations and the same seed sources, the same genetic material might be suitable under these conditions. So also within tree species ranges, we probably need assisted gene flow and the transfer of seed forest reproductive material. And then we look at the very warmest fringe of the species distributions. We might need to consider the ex situ conservation of important genetic resources, because these genetic resources are often the most useful, and they are certainly needed to adapt forests in the mid-range or in the northern range. With this, we should ask ourselves, are we ready for implementing assisted migration or gene flow in Europe? And we ourselves at the BFW and with some colleagues in Europe, we've asked ourselves these questions a couple of years ago. And then we came out, oh, there is very little knowledge about that. And there are a couple of questions that needs to be addressed in order to get moving into an assisted migration. One is, to which tree species harbor adaptive variation related to climate conditions, and what is in relation to climate extremes? How to identify valuable populations for seed transfer and to match them with future habitats? What are the climatic limits of seed transfer? And very, very important is also, what are the legal constraints in seed transfer? Austria and many Central European countries already have a very small size, and the species distributions, they span across the complete continent. Some species even from, let's say, from Italy up to the very north to Finland and Sweden. And it's important, if we talk about assisted migration, there will be not a national solution. That can only be a continental solution if we want to move something forward here. And I just want to show an example how we started with some kind of analysis and how we started to get some work on that. And this was in the project SASTRI, which was an Interreg project in the Central European region. And within this project, we were able to harmonize, to establish a database of provenance trials across Europe with more than 500, nearly 600 provenance trials of 7 important European species. And with this database, we developed so-called universal climate response models, which show the growth and the vitality of these trees in the different tree populations, independence of the provenance origin, so from where the seeds were coming, and in accordance, in response to the climate of where these tree provenance have been planted. Let's say for Norway spruce, for example, we have 250 trials and more than 1,000 tested seed sources all across Europe within this model. And of course, we consider in this model the most important climatic variables, which were found to be important for the growth and the behavior of these provenances. Very quickly show a little bit of the results. With these models, we are able, on the one side, we are able to divide the distribution of the species according to climatic parameters, to group them in very coarse-grained. And I know the people who are working in the forest reproductive material issue and which are responsible for the national provenance regions, they were very crazy when they saw our figure and say, wow, there is only 1 or 2, you suggest only 1 or 2 provenance regions within my country. That's completely crazy. Yeah. But with these kind of models, we are able to make suggestions on which provenances would be the best to would have been the best to plant them in the past, and which would be the best to plant them in the future. And in many cases across Europe, it will not be the local provenances that should be the best for the future, but it will be a provenances from somewhere else. And this also helps us to, let's say, to evaluate how the vulnerability in climate change can be affected by the right provenance choice. For example, if we are just staying with the local seed sources, we will see decreasing productivity. However, if you use the best seed source from often another country and another region, we will see still increasing or sustain the productivity of our forests. The same is available for now 7 species. This is just the same picture for Fagus for European beech. And at the end, I just want to also mention that, of course, one thing is to develop models and to use the old trials, but the next step is also to go into the wild and test assisted migration in gene flow in the forests. And this is what we have done a couple of years ago with a first test site. Unfortunately, not more than 50 as in Switzerland, I have to say. But this is a test site that we established in Lower Austria 4 years ago with 27 different tree species, also with different provenances of a few species, not all of them. And it's already a little bit on higher elevation, and we intentionally tested all the species which we would not expect and which would no forester test there, like oaks and so on. And just published 2 days ago the first paper out of this for those who are interested. And including some assessing of whatever is needed to understand the behavior of these species. Finally, we also need to understand what kind of tree species would be needed at the lower elevation levels in Austria. So this is, let's say, lower elevations in Lower Austria are already at the lower border of forests, actually. And therefore, we started 2 years ago also to establish a new test site in total on 5 hectares with 30 different tree species. And here we had to increase the number of non-native tree species because the number of native species which already have problems, where we see problems with pests and diseases, is already huge. In the next weeks, in 2 weeks, we will start the next phase of this project and establish another 2 hectares of that. If you want to follow, look on our site on Instagram.
Silvio,
I want to come to conclusions. Climate change and the fight against climate change and its consequences are among the largest challenges in human history. And we as forest scientists are at the outmost frontier to deliver solutions for forest adaptation and climate change mitigation. This includes understanding and identifying genetic variation and its local adaptations, conserving and monitoring this variation for future generations, providing knowledge for assisted gene migration and gene flow, and adapt existing national and transnational legislations. With this, I'm sorry if I was a little bit too long. I want to thank you again, and thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Silvio. Yeah, in the seek or in the sense of saving some time, Katharina allowed for one question.
Exactly.
The rest I would like to ask you, please, in the chat directly. You had quite some nice questions. Just let me pick one from René in this case, because it was also commented as a very interesting question. How do we deal with the uncertainty of future climate projections when we design such kind of assisted migration? Yeah, it's decision making under uncertainty. Please, a very short answer, Silvio.
Yeah. So what we try to look for is we would test assisted migration within the models, and in the models it's pretty easy for different climate change scenario, and then look which of these suggestions it would be safe under a variety of different climate change scenarios. But I fear with the very extreme climate change scenarios, we would be outside of the future range of many tree species.